Keanu Reeves rushed into a vet clinic, but what happened next shocked everyone. When Keanu Reeves walked into a veterinary clinic one morning, carrying a weak rescue dog in his arms, he expected kindness, urgency, anything but what actually happened. The vet on duty barely spared him a glance before dismissing him with a sneer, assuming he was just another homeless man who couldn't pay. What this arrogant veterinarian failed to realize, blinded by his own snap judgment, was that the man standing before him was none other than Keanu Reeves. And he was about to regret his actions in a way he never saw coming. Before we dive into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The early morning sun had just started peeking over the city skyline as Keanu walked down the quiet street, his well-worn jeans and hoodie making him blend into the early risers heading to work. He wasn't here for Hollywood, red carpets, or flashing cameras. He was here for something much more important. As he approached the animal shelter, Paws of Hope Animal Rescue came into view, a cheerful sign with bright lettering, standing in stark contrast to the difficult reality inside. Keanu reached for the door, his mind already focused on the animals that needed help. But just as his fingers touched the handle, the door burst open violently, nearly knocking him off balance. A man in a white coat stormed out, his phone pressed tightly to his ear, his voice sharp and dismissive. "I told you, no free patients today. If they can't pay, they don't get treatment. I don't care if he's already here, get him out." Keanu stood frozen for a moment, watching as the man, clearly a veterinarian, marched toward his car without a second thought. His words echoed in Keanu's mind, a painful reminder of how many animals and their owners were turned away simply because they couldn't afford help. Shaking his head, Keanu pushed open the door and stepped inside. The familiar mix of barking, meowing, and the scent of disinfectant filled the air. It wasn't glamorous, but this was the world Keanu cared about just as much, if not more, than the one he was famous for. Behind the reception desk, a woman's eyes lit up the moment she saw him. "Mr. Reeves, I didn't know you were stopping by today." Keanu smiled, leaning against the counter. "Hey, Nina. Had some free time and figured I'd check in. How's everything?" Her smile faltered just a little. "We've been better. One of our older dogs, he's got a tumor in his belly. We called in a vet, but..." She hesitated. Keanu's brow furrowed. "The guy who just stormed out?" Nina sighed. "Yeah, that's him. He's one of the only vets willing to come on short notice. But he can be difficult." Keanu exhaled slowly. He didn't care about the man's attitude, only about whether the dog had been treated. "Where's Chris?" he asked, referring to the shelter's manager and his longtime friend. "In the back with the dog." Nodding, Keanu made his way to the main shelter area. The sounds of animals grew louder as he passed rows of kennels, each holding a dog or cat with a story, some abandoned, some rescued from the streets, all waiting for a second chance. In the corner, Chris knelt beside an elderly dog, gently coaxing it to take some medicine. His tired but kind eyes looked up as Keanu approached, and a smile spread across his face. "Keanu. Man, I had no idea you were in town." They shook hands, their years of friendship evident in the casual ease of their greeting. "Just finished a project and thought I'd drop by," Keanu said. "Nina mentioned one of the dogs isn't doing well?" Chris nodded, glancing at the frail dog beside him. "Yeah. Buddy's been here a long time. We noticed a growth in his abdomen, and our regular vet is out of town. So we called in someone new." Keanu crossed his arms. "I think I ran into him on my way in. Seemed in a hurry." Chris sighed. "Yeah. He's not the easiest person to deal with, but he knows his stuff. We were just grateful he showed up." Keanu's gaze softened as he knelt beside Buddy, gently running a hand over the dog's head. "Did he actually treat him?" Chris hesitated before shaking his head. "No. He barely even examined him. Said he needed upfront payment and walked out when we told him we couldn't afford it right away." Keanu's jaw tightened. He glanced down at Buddy, the old dog's eyes full of trust despite the pain. "Don't worry, Buddy," Keanu murmured, a quiet determination settling over him. Because if this so-called vet thought turning away an animal in need was acceptable, he was about to learn a very, very harsh lesson. What happened next? Let's just say, that vet wasn't expecting the world to find out what he had done. Stay tuned for part 2, because when Keanu Reeves steps up for something he believes in, the story is far from over. If you were moved by this story, drop a comment below and let us know. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. Keanu Reeves thought he was just visiting a shelter, but he was about to change a life. Keanu Reeves had always been known for his kindness, but when he stopped by Paws of Hope Animal Rescue that morning, he had no idea that one meeting would change everything. As he walked through the shelter, passing rows of hopeful eyes staring back at him from their kennels, he couldn't help but admire the dedication of Chris and his team. These animals had been through so much, yet here they were, safe, cared for, and waiting for their second chance. "You've done an incredible job here, Chris," Keanu said, his voice full of genuine admiration. "These animals, they look happy, considering everything they've been through." Chris's face lit up with pride. "It's all thanks to people like you, Keanu. You remember the early days, how tough it was. Some of these dogs were abandoned, left to fend for themselves. But with your help, we've been able to turn their stories around." As they walked along the kennels, Chris suddenly stopped, his eyes bright with excitement. "Oh, I almost forgot. We have a new arrival. I think you'd want to meet him." He reached for the latch of one of the kennels and carefully opened the door. "Keanu, this is Bruno. And trust me, he's a fighter." A German shepherd slowly stepped out, his movements cautious, his eyes scanning the room warily. Despite the weariness in his gaze, there was something regal about him, something that immediately drew Keanu in. "Bruno's been through hell," Chris said gently, stroking the dog's fur. "We found him abandoned, inside a trash truck." Keanu's expression darkened. "A trash truck?" Chris nodded grimly. "Someone dumped him, probably because he was sick. If the garbage worker hadn't noticed him, he wouldn't have made it. Can you imagine? Just throwing away a living soul like garbage?" Keanu clenched his jaw. Anger flared up, quickly followed by something else, gratitude. Gratitude that Bruno had been saved. "How long has he been here?" Keanu asked, crouching down, his eyes softening as he met Bruno's cautious gaze. "Just over a week," Chris replied. "When he came in, he was in bad shape, fleas, cataracts, malnutrition, injured limbs, even seizures. But he's a fighter. He hasn't had a single seizure in 3 days now." Keanu reached out, but not before pausing. "May I?" he asked, respecting the dog's space. Chris nodded. "Go ahead, just slow and gentle." He's still learning to trust again. As Keanu's hand met Bruno's fur, a quiet connection formed between them. Despite everything, despite the betrayal, the pain, Bruno still had it in him to trust. That resilience, that quiet hope, was what made these animals so incredible. Keanu looked back at Chris, a renewed sense of purpose settling in. "You're doing something special here, Chris. How can I help?" Chris hesitated, clearly moved by the offer. "Keanu, you've already done so much for us." He exhaled, choosing his words carefully. "But we've been thinking about expanding. A bigger space would mean more room for dogs like Bruno to heal, more families to adopt, even a proper play area for them. It's a big dream, but..." His voice softened. "If anyone could help make it happen, it's you." Keanu nodded, his mind already racing with ideas. But before he could speak, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Nina appeared in the doorway, looking slightly apologetic. "Sorry to interrupt, but we should probably start the staff meeting soon. Everyone's waiting." Chris checked his watch and blinked in surprise. "Already? Wow, time got away from me." "Thanks, Nina." He turned back to Keanu, offering an apologetic smile. I hate to cut this short, but we have a weekly staff meeting to go over shelter operations. I'd invite you, but it's mostly boring logistics. Keanu chuckled. No worries. I should probably get going anyway. Chris hesitated, then suddenly had an idea. Actually, if you're not in a hurry, would you want to take Bruno for a walk? He hasn't been outside yet today, and I think some fresh air would do him good. Keanu's face lit up. I'd love to, he said, then hesitated. But what about his seizures? What if something happens? Chris nodded, appreciating the concern. Good question. It's been a few days since his last one, but just to be safe, stay close to the shelter and keep him in quiet areas. No loud noises, no big crowds, just a peaceful walk. Keanu nodded. Got it. Stay close, keep it quiet. Anything else? Chris reached over to a nearby shelf and grabbed a small backpack. Here, he said, handing it over. Water, snacks, a toy, and a little something extra in case you need it. Keanu slung the backpack over his shoulder, looking down at Bruno. What do you think, buddy? Feel like going on an adventure? The German Shepherd didn't move at first, just watching Keanu. Then, slowly, he took a cautious step forward. It wasn't just a walk. For Bruno, this was something bigger. A new beginning. Want to know what happens next? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because this story is far from over. Keanu Reeves took a rescue dog for a walk. What happened next took everyone by surprise. When Keanu Reeves slung the backpack over his shoulder and took the leash from Chris, he couldn't help but feel a familiar sense of excitement. Despite all his years supporting animal rescues, it had been a while since he'd spent one-on-one time with a shelter dog like this. Chris gave Bruno a final pat before handing over the leash. You two have a good walk. We shouldn't be more than an hour or so. As Keanu led Bruno toward the shelter's exit, he marveled at the dog's demeanor. Given everything Bruno had been through, abandonment, injury, even seizures, he walked calmly by Keanu's side, his ears perked, his eyes scanning the world around him with quiet curiosity. You're such a good boy, aren't you? Keanu murmured, scratching Bruno gently behind the ears. I wonder what happened to you. How could anyone abandon such a well-behaved dog? They set off down a quiet street, Keanu keeping a watchful eye on Bruno's reactions. The German Shepherd seemed to enjoy the walk, his nose twitching as he took in the scents around him. But as they rounded a corner, everything changed. Bruno's posture stiffened. His nose shot to the ground, and suddenly, he began pulling on the leash with a new sense of urgency. Whoa, easy there, buddy, Keanu said, tightening his grip to keep control. What's got you so excited? Bruno didn't slow down. His focus was locked on something invisible to Keanu, and before he knew it, he found himself being led rather than leading. Then, as they crested a small hill, Keanu saw it. A park lay before them, the morning sun glinting off a bubbling fountain at its center. The sound of running water filled the air, and Bruno's pace quickened even more. Steady, Bruno, Keanu called, laughing as he struggled to keep up with the enthusiastic dog. He remembered Chris's warning about overstimulation, but Bruno clearly had other ideas. As they reached the fountain, Bruno's nose remained glued to the ground. He circled the stone base, tracking some invisible scent. Keanu tried to distract him. Hey, Bruno, what about this? He reached into the backpack and pulled out a frisbee. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it a short distance away. Bruno hesitated, his focus wavering between the scent and the game. But then, with a joyful bark, he bounded after the frisbee, his earlier caution forgotten in the excitement of play. Keanu chuckled. Chris must be taking great care of you, buddy. You've got more stamina than I do. They played for several minutes, Keanu gradually putting more power behind his throws. One particularly enthusiastic toss sent the frisbee sailing higher and farther than he intended, arcing gracefully through the air, before landing with a splash in the fountain. Oh no, Keanu muttered, already anticipating what was about to happen. Before he could stop him, Bruno launched himself into the water. Water exploded in every direction as the German Shepherd paddled excitedly, his tail wagging, his mouth open in pure joy. Keanu doubled over with laughter, shaking his head. Well, I guess there was no avoiding that. Bruno swam over to the frisbee, grabbed it in his mouth, and turned back to Keanu as if expecting praise. "All right, come on, buddy," Keanu called, reaching out to help him climb out. As soon as Bruno was on solid ground, he did what every wet dog does, shook. Water droplets flew in every direction, thoroughly soaking Keanu in the process. Keanu groaned, looking down at his drenched clothes. "Thanks for that, pal." But one look at Bruno's wide, happy grin, and he couldn't even pretend to be mad. Checking his watch, Keanu realized they'd been out for nearly half an hour already. Remembering Chris's advice about avoiding too much excitement, he figured it was time to start heading back. "All right, Bruno," he said, giving the dog a final pat. "I think that's enough fun for one day. Let's get you dried off and back to the shelter." They turned toward the street, the morning sun now higher in the sky, casting warm light over the quiet neighborhood. Life had begun to stir, people leaving for work, the occasional dog walker passing by. Bruno, still damp from his fountain adventure, trotted beside Keanu, more relaxed now. Whether it was from the exercise, the fresh air, or just the simple joy of companionship, he seemed at peace. But just as they rounded the next corner, chaos struck. A sharp, clattering noise filled the air, wheels on pavement, moving fast. A young boy on a skateboard came zooming down the sidewalk, his board rattling loudly against the uneven pavement. Bruno's entire body tensed. His ears flattened, his muscles coiled, and before Keanu could react, he barked. Loudly. The sudden noise startled the boy, who wobbled on his board for a split second before regaining balance. He shot Keanu a nervous glance, but kept going, disappearing down the street. Keanu immediately turned his attention to Bruno, tightening his grip on the leash. "Easy, buddy," he murmured, crouching beside the dog, reaching out to pat his head. "It's okay. Nothing to worry about." Bruno's chest rose and fell rapidly, his body still tense, but as Keanu's hand stroked gently behind his ears, he began to relax. Keanu exhaled, realizing just how fragile trust could be. Bruno had come so far. But fear was something that took time to heal. Keanu gave him another reassuring pat. "You're safe now, Bruno. No one's ever going to throw you away again." And as they continued their walk back to the shelter, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that, somehow, this wouldn't be the last time he and Bruno crossed paths. What do you think happens next? Will Keanu be able to help Bruno overcome his fears? Drop a comment below and let us know. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more incredible rescue stories. Keanu Reeves thought it was just a walk, then everything went terribly wrong. Keanu had been enjoying his time with Bruno, watching the German Shepherd slowly come out of his shell. The dog, once cautious and unsure, had played, explored, and even taken an impromptu swim in a fountain. But just as Keanu reassured Bruno after a startling encounter with a skateboarder, something changed. The dog's body stiffened. His legs trembled. And before Keanu could react, Bruno collapsed. "Bruno!" Keanu dropped to his knees, panic surging through him as he watched the German Shepherd's body convulse violently. His limbs twitched uncontrollably, and foamy saliva formed around his mouth. Keanu had known about Bruno's history of seizures. But knowing and witnessing one firsthand were two very different things. For a moment, he felt frozen. The sight was overwhelming, terrifying. But then, his mind flashed back to a dog he and Chris had rescued years ago, one who had suffered from epilepsy. He knew seizures were frightening, but not usually fatal. Still, Bruno needed help. Fast. With shaky hands, Keanu fumbled for his phone, quickly scrolling to find Chris's number. As the phone rang, he kept one hand on Bruno, his voice soft but urgent. "Come on, Chris, pick up. Pick up." No answer. Keanu's heart sank as he realized Chris was still in the shelter's staff meeting. His phone was probably silenced. Bruno's body was still trembling, his breathing shallow. Walking back to Paws of Hope would take at least 15 minutes, longer if Keanu had to carry him. And the backpack Chris had given him? It had the basics: water, snacks, toys, but nothing that could help with a seizure. Bruno needed medical attention. Now. Keanu's mind raced. Then, suddenly, a memory surfaced. A veterinary clinic. Keanu had sponsored one in this area, a fully equipped facility meant for exactly this kind of emergency. But where was it? His fingers moved to his phone again, opening the Maps app, but before he could search, a movement caught his eye. A woman had just stepped out of a house across the street, a small chihuahua trotting beside her on a leash. Keanu's heart leapt. A local resident, she might know where the nearest vet clinic was. By now, Bruno's seizure had stopped, but the dog lay motionless on the pavement, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Keanu had to act. He shot to his feet and waved, calling out with urgency. "Excuse me." His voice was steady, but desperate. "I'm sorry to bother you, but do you know where the nearest vet clinic is? It's an emergency." The woman turned, her expression shifting from surprise to concern as she took in the sight before her, Keanu, disheveled and kneeling beside a clearly distressed dog. "Oh, you poor things," she murmured, hurrying across the street. "Yes, there's a vet clinic not far from here. Maybe a 10-minute drive." Keanu's stomach dropped. Even if he carried Bruno, it would take too long to walk. His only option? Ask for a ride. "I hate to impose," he said, swallowing his pride, "but this dog needs help urgently. Is there any way you could drive us?" The woman barely hesitated. "Of course," she said, already turning back toward her house. "Let me grab my car. Can you carry him?" Keanu exhaled in relief. "Yes, thank you. You have no idea how much this means." As the woman hurried back inside, Keanu knelt beside Bruno again. The German shepherd's eyes were half-lidded, his breathing weak, but steady. "Hang in there, buddy," Keanu murmured, stroking the dog's fur. "Help is on the way." A car engine roared to life, and Keanu looked up to see the woman pulling out of her garage. She quickly parked on the street and got out, opening the back door. "Here," she said, moving to help. "Let's get him in." Together, they carefully lifted Bruno into the back seat. The woman's chihuahua, perched in the front seat, watched curiously as Keanu slid into the back beside Bruno, settling the large dog across his lap. Keanu looked up at his rescuer, feeling overwhelming gratitude. "I can't thank you enough," he said. She shook her head, waving off his thanks as she started the car. "It's no trouble at all. I'm just glad I was here to help." As the car sped toward the clinic, Keanu kept one hand on Bruno, feeling the slow but steady rhythm of his breathing. The worst of the seizure was over, but Keanu knew they weren't out of the woods yet. Then, the woman spoke. "So, sir." She glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "Are you new to the area? I don't think I've seen you around before." Keanu hesitated. In the urgency of the moment, she hadn't recognized him. His damp clothes, messy hair, and concerned expression had disguised him, made him look like any other worried dog owner. And in a way, he liked that. For once, he wasn't being helped because he was Keanu Reeves, the celebrity. He was being helped simply because he was a person in need. And that was real kindness. What happens next? Will Bruno make it in time? And what will happen when the woman realizes who she just rescued? Drop a comment below and let us know what you think. And if you were moved by this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon for more incredible rescue stories. Keanu Reeves' walk with a rescue dog turned into a life-changing mission. Keanu Reeves had taken Bruno, a rescued German Shepherd, for a simple walk, but their peaceful outing turned into a crisis when the dog suddenly collapsed, suffering a violent seizure. Keanu, heart racing, tried calling for help, but Chris, the shelter manager, was unavailable. Desperate, Keanu spotted a woman nearby and asked for directions to the nearest vet. Seeing Bruno's condition, the kind stranger didn't hesitate. She offered Keanu and the dog a ride to the clinic. As they sped through the streets, Bruno suffered another seizure. The woman quickly handed Keanu a blanket, and he gently wrapped it around the trembling dog, trying to soothe him. Finally, they arrived at Bright Care Veterinary Clinic. As the woman wished him luck and declined a monetary thank you, Keanu carried Bruno inside, only to be met with cold indifference. The receptionist, Linda, barely looked up. When Keanu explained Bruno's emergency, she dismissed him, assuming he couldn't pay. Even when he tried to help a homeless man outside, whose sick dog was also denied care, Linda and the clinic's lead vet, Dr. Porter, remained unmoved. As Keanu sat in the waiting area, another seizure struck Bruno. Keanu begged for help, but the staff ignored him. He was even denied a simple bottle of water for Bruno until he slammed money on the counter in frustration. Meanwhile, wealthier clients received immediate attention. One man, Tom Johnson, was greeted warmly, while Keanu, still mistaken for a homeless man, was brushed aside. Then, everything changed. Tom suddenly recognized Keanu. Shock rippled through the room. Dr. Porter, realizing his mistake, panicked. Linda, who had thrown away Keanu's registration form, went pale. Keanu, however, was done being polite. With quiet authority, he revealed his donor plaque hanging on the clinic's wall, proving that he had personally funded this very clinic. Looking directly at Dr. Porter and Linda, he made it clear. Compassion shouldn't depend on money. Every life here deserves care, no matter their owner's circumstances. Dr. Porter stammered out an apology, but Keanu wasn't interested in empty words. He called Chris, who rushed over with the right medication for Bruno. Together, they left, taking Bruno somewhere he'd receive the care he deserved. But Keanu wasn't done. Before leaving, he helped the homeless man, Billy, giving him enough money for food, water, and vet care. Then, he sent him to Paws of Hope Animal Rescue, where Chris and his team welcomed him with open arms. Back at the shelter, Keanu and Chris discussed a bigger mission. "This isn't just one bad clinic," Keanu said. "It's a bigger problem. We need to do something." Chris agreed. With Keanu's influence, they could expand Paws of Hope, build a low-cost veterinary clinic, and fight for real change. As Keanu stood before the shelter staff, looking at the dedicated team working tirelessly to save lives, he knew. This was just the beginning. What happens next? Keanu just uncovered a huge problem in animal care, and now he's ready to change the system. Would you support his mission? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to spread awareness about animal welfare.